she never imagined a single phone call could change her entire life. The morning sunlight had filtered through the half-open blinds, painting soft lines across the hardwood floor of their apartment. Ava sat at the small kitchen table, her notebook open in front of her, pens scattered like confetti, coffee cooling in a chipped mug. She had been writing, as she always did, scribbling lists, reminders, tiny thoughts about the baby, and dreams she had tucked into the corners of her mind. Her hand rested lightly on the swell of her stomach, tracing circles, feeling the flutter of the life growing inside her. 6 months pregnant, and yet feeling both light and heavy, fragile and strong all at once. Her phone vibrated on the table, making her jump slightly. She knew the number before she even looked. Mark. His name flashed across the screen in bold, familiar letters. Her thumb hovered over the answer button for longer than it should have. Something in her gut whispered that this call wasn't ordinary, that this time everything might shift. "Hello?" she said finally, voice careful, as if the wrong tone could fracture the fragile world she was holding together. "Hey, Ava." Mark's voice sounded different, strained, awkward, unrecognizable. There was a quiet pause before he spoke again, the kind that drags your heart into a pit of anticipation and fear. I... Uh, I need to talk to you about something." Ava's heart began to race. She could feel it hammering in her chest. "Okay," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "What is it?" There was another pause, longer this time. Then the words fell, each one slicing through her like a shard of glass. I met someone I want to be with." Her breath caught. The spoon in her hand slipped slightly, clattering against the edge of the mug. "What are you saying?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He swallowed audibly on the other end. "I'm saying I'm leaving. I'm so sorry, Ava. I didn't want it to happen like this, but I love her." The world tilted. Ava stared at the phone, unblinking, unable to speak. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. 6 months? A child? All of the plans they had whispered to each other during quiet nights in bed, all the dreams of a shared future, they were crumbling into dust at the sound of his voice. "You... what?" she managed finally, her voice trembling. "You're leaving me now? With the baby?" "Yes, I didn't plan for this to hurt you. I didn't plan to hurt me?" Ava's voice rose, the anger bubbling beneath the surface, tinged with disbelief. "You're leaving me pregnant, Mark. Did you even think about how that would feel?" There was a silence, one that stretched for what felt like hours. Then he spoke again, softer this time, almost pleading. I can't explain. It's complicated. It's never complicated when it's easy for you," she interrupted, bitterness sharp in her tone. "It's easy to walk away when it suits you, isn't it?" He didn't answer. And in that silence, Ava felt the full weight of betrayal settle over her like a storm cloud. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, the father of her child, he was gone. And just like that, her life, the life she had carefully nurtured, was gone too. She sank into the chair, head resting on her hands. The apartment felt impossibly large, the walls closing in with echoes of laughter and conversations that now seemed like lies. She could almost hear the ghost of Mark in the corners, the memory of his smile, the warmth of his hand over hers. Everything had been real, until it wasn't. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed irrelevant as she sat there, staring at the blank page in front of her, the notebook mocking her attempts to make sense of the chaos. The coffee had gone cold, the sun had climbed higher, indifferent to the storm inside her. Ava's mind wandered, not for the first time, to the moments that had led here. The first time they had met at the university library, both reaching for the same worn copy of a poetry book. Mark's laugh had made her heart skip, and she had thought, even then, that life was giving her a gift. Their first date at that little Italian place by the river, how he had ordered 2 bottles of wine because he didn't want her to feel anything but happiness. The tiny apartment they had moved into together, how they painted the walls sky blue, imagining the nursery for their future child. All of it, it seemed, had been nothing but a fragile illusion. And yet, even as her chest ached with heartbreak, she felt something else creeping in, a spark of clarity. She could let this destroy her, let the betrayal crush her spirit as she imagined Mark's happiness with someone else. Or she could fight for herself, for her child, for the life she still had a chance to build. The baby kicked, faintly but insistently, as if reminding her she wasn't alone, that the world was entirely lost. Ava placed her hand over her stomach, feeling the small, miraculous movements, and, for the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. The tears came then, not just of sorrow, but of recognition. Life, she realized, would go on, and she had a choice, to crumble or to rise. The rest of the day blurred into a haze of calls she couldn't answer and friends she couldn't yet face. She avoided the grocery store, avoided the familiar paths they had walked together, avoided mirrors that reflected the woman Mark had abandoned. But she did not avoid herself. Every heartbeat, every movement of the baby, every breath reminded her that she was still here, and she was not powerless. That night, as rain pattered softly against the window, Ava sat by the small lamp in the living room, journal open, writing furiously. Words poured out: anger, fear, confusion, heartbreak, and, quietly, hope. She wrote about the future, about the child she would raise alone, about the life she would not let this betrayal define. She wrote about strength she didn't know she had, and courage she would need to discover. She didn't sleep much that night. She didn't need to. Sleep would come eventually. For now, she clung to the rawness of her emotions, because in that rawness, she realized the first truth of her new life. Everything could change in a single moment, and though the call had shattered her world, it had also opened the door to something she couldn't see, but something that just might, be better than she had ever imagined. Some moments make you question everything you thought you knew. Ava arrived at her mother's home just as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The familiar scent of jasmine from her mother's garden clung to the air, comforting and foreign all at once. She had packed only what she could carry in a single duffel bag: clothes that still smelled faintly of Mark, a few baby blankets, and her notebook filled with sketches, reminders, and plans she wasn't ready to face. Every item was a memory, and every memory was a wound. Helen, her mother, stood on the porch, arms crossed, but eyes soft, a mixture of worry and relief. "You look tired," she said, voice low, careful not to sound judgmental. "Do you want some tea?" Ava nodded, unable to speak. The words wouldn't come. She was too raw, too tangled in the storm of some moments make you question everything you thought you knew. Ava arrived at her mother's home just as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The familiar scent of jasmine from her mother's garden clung to the air, comforting and foreign all at once. She had packed only what she could carry in a single duffel bag, clothes that still smelled faintly of Mark, a few baby blankets, and her notebook filled with sketches, reminders, and plans she wasn't ready to face. Every item was a memory, and every memory was a wound. Helen, her mother, stood on the porch, arms crossed, but eyes soft, a mixture of worry and relief. "You look tired," she said, voice low, careful not to sound judgmental. "Do you want some tea?" Ava nodded, unable to speak. The words wouldn't come. She was too raw, too tangled in the storm of feelings swirling inside her. She felt like a fragile vessel, carried only by the momentum of survival, and every step she took inside the warm, familiar home made the reality hit harder. She was alone, truly alone, in a world that no longer felt safe. The first night in her mother's spare room was the hardest. The familiar creaks of the floorboards, once comforting, now sounded like echoes of abandonment. Ava lay in bed, the small life inside her kicking gently, a quiet reminder of hope in the midst of despair. She whispered softly, "It's just us now, little one. We'll be okay." But even as she spoke, the words felt hollow, swallowed by the silence. Sleep refused her. Every time she closed her eyes, memories of Mark flooded in. The way he laughed across the kitchen table, the way he held her hand during storms, the promises they had made late at night when the world was quiet. Each memory stung, a reminder that trust, once broken, leaves scars that aren't easily soothed. She rolled onto her side, stomach pressed to the mattress, feeling the baby shift, tiny fingers or toes brushing against her ribs, reminding her that life, stubborn and relentless, moved forward even when the heart refuses to. Mornings were no easier. She attended prenatal appointments alone, the sterile smell of the hospital corridors amplifying the emptiness she felt. Nurses smiled politely, checking vitals, monitoring growth, measuring progress, but no one could fill the hollow that Mark's absence had left. When she returned home, the house felt both welcoming and oppressive, filled with the echoes of a life she had imagined, but now could never reclaim. Helen tried to help in ways both small and large. She made meals, tidied the apartment, reminded Ava to rest. But even kindness can't erase the ache of betrayal. There were moments when Ava would sit at the kitchen table, staring out the window, feeling the rain beat softly against the glass, and imagine how everything she had counted on could vanish in a single night. And yet, amid the despair, there were small sparks of resilience. Ava began to notice them in subtle ways. The first time she felt her baby respond to her voice, the warmth of a teacup in her hands, the quiet comfort of Helen's presence. These small moments were fragile, but they reminded her that life wasn't over, it had only shifted. She began to write again, letting words flow without editing or structure, simply pouring out the storm inside her. Her journal became a sanctuary, a place where she could confront the betrayal, process the anger, and slowly begin to plan for the future. She wrote letters to Mark she never intended to send, filled with raw, unfiltered emotion, anger, hurt, fear, and sometimes love that still lingered despite everything. Days bled into nights, and Eva's body began to feel the strain of her emotional turmoil. Fatigue pressed against her, every movement heavier than the last. She felt isolated even among people who cared for her, as if an invisible barrier had formed around her heart, shielding it from further pain, but also from comfort. She learned to navigate the world cautiously, stepping lightly through the minefield of her own feelings. Even mundane activities became challenges: grocery shopping alone, carrying bags of food, dealing with strangers' small talk, and managing the relentless physical changes of pregnancy tested her patience and endurance. Yet each task she completed felt like a small victory, proof that she could still function, still fight, still exist despite the fracture in her world. The evenings were the most difficult. The house quieted down, and Ava found herself wandering through the rooms, lingering on the places that once held memories of Mark. She would sit in the living room, tracing her fingers along the edge of the coffee table, imagining him there, laughing at something trivial, and then the emptiness would hit again, sharper than before. The baby kicked, as if sensing her sorrow, and she whispered apologies she didn't know were hers to give. Helen, ever patient, would sometimes join her silently, sitting beside her, letting Ava lean against her shoulder, offering quiet support without words. Those nights, though bittersweet, became a rhythm, a way to survive, one heartbeat, one kick, one breath at a time. Ava began to notice patterns in her pain. She would allow herself to cry in the morning when the world was still soft and forgiving. She would write in the afternoon, channeling the anger and confusion into words. And at night, she would whisper to the baby, offering reassurance, promises of a life they would build together, a world they would inhabit without the shadow of betrayal. The days stretched long, and slowly Ava began to regain fragments of herself. She started taking walks through the neighborhood, letting the wind brush her face, the sunlight warm her skin. She visited local parks, imagining the baby running alongside her in the future, and she allowed herself to dream small dreams again, dreams of comfort, stability, and peace. She began to notice the resilience inside her, a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished. Every time she made a meal, every time she managed an errand, every time she survived another sleepless night, she felt that flame grow, a reminder that she was capable of more than surviving. She could endure, she could rise, she could thrive. And in those moments, alone but not defeated, Ava began to understand something vital. Her world might feel empty, but it was not over. Betrayal had changed her path, but it had not ended her story. The life growing inside her was proof, a tiny, insistent heartbeat that demanded she keep going, that whispered of hope and of strength she had yet to fully recognize. Then came the letter that made her world tilt again, this time in a way she could never have imagined. It arrived on a Monday morning, tucked between bills and advertisements, an envelope that looked official but mundane. Ava had almost tossed it aside, expecting another routine notice she didn't want to read. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, embossed with a seal she didn't immediately recognize. The handwriting was precise, formal, and yet there was something personal about it that made her pause. She sliced it open carefully, fingers trembling, coffee cooling on the counter. The letterhead read, "Estate of Eleanor Whitman." Ava froze. Her grandmother, Eleanor Whitman, had passed years ago, quietly, in a small house on the outskirts of Portland. Ava had been a child then, visiting only occasionally, never fully understanding the woman's secretive life. She remembered the smell of old books, the garden bursting with roses and lavender, the soft creak of the front steps. Eleanor had been distant but kind, a woman who had carried herself with quiet dignity and a hint of mystery. Ava unfolded the letter, scanning the formal text. "To Ava Sinclair Whitman," it began, "you are hereby informed that as the sole surviving heir of Eleanor Whitman, you are entitled to her estate, including assets, trusts, and holdings accumulated over her lifetime. The estimated value of the inheritance is $5 billion. $5 billion. Ava's eyes widened, her heart skipping a beat. The number made no sense. She read it again, then again, as if the repetition could somehow make the words real. The coffee in her mug sloshed over the rim, but she didn't notice. The room seemed to tilt, the familiar walls of her mother's kitchen spinning around her. This, this can't be real, she whispered, voice barely audible even to herself. She sank into the chair, gripping the letter tightly, as if letting go would make the words disappear. Helen appeared in the doorway, a towel in her hands. Ava, are you okay? Ava shook her head, trying to process. Mom, it says, it says I I inherited $5 billion. Helen froze, the towel slipping slightly from her grasp. She approached slowly, disbelief etched across her face. $5 billion? She repeated. That's impossible. I know. Her mind raced. How could her grandmother, a woman who had lived quietly away from the city, have amassed this kind of wealth? She had barely known her. Her visits had been brief, her conversations polite and surface level. The grandmother she remembered had been distant, private, perhaps even secretive, but she hadn't seemed capable of this, of all this. The shock was overwhelming. Ava felt a strange combination of disbelief, fear, and curiosity. She imagined what Mark would think if he knew. She imagined Claudia, the woman he had left her for. The thought was almost painful in its irony. He had chosen ambition and wealth over her, yet wealth had found her in a way he could never have predicted. Ava spent the next few hours pacing the living room, the letter clutched in her hands, rereading it over and over. She tried to call the law firm listed in the notice, but couldn't bring herself to speak. What would she even say? Hello, I just inherited $5 billion. The absurdity made her both laugh and cry. Finally, late that afternoon, she summoned the courage. She dialed the number, and a calm, professional voice answered. Whitman and Associates, how may I help you? My name is Ava Sinclair Whitman. I I received a notice about my grandmother's estate. Ah, yes, Ms. Whitman. Congratulations. Your grandmother's estate has been transferred to your name as the sole heir, and there are a few formalities to complete. But you are now the legal owner of all trusts, assets, and holdings under her name. Ava swallowed hard. All of it? All of it, the lawyer confirmed, including the international holdings, properties, and financial instruments. The estimated value is approximately $5 billion. The words echoed in her mind, each repetition making them feel simultaneously more real and more surreal. Ava hung up and sat in stunned silence. Her life had changed in a single day. Not because of betrayal this time, but because of legacy, fortune, and the quiet power her grandmother had accumulated over a lifetime. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, the letter spread open before her. She thought about the baby, small and stirring inside her, and the irony of life's timing. She had been abandoned, left to face the challenges of pregnancy alone, and now she was being handed an unimaginable gift. But how could she reconcile this? Wealth had never been a measure of happiness. Could it really change her life, or was it simply another layer of complication in a world that already felt too fragile? Over the next week, Ava met with financial advisors and legal representatives, slowly unraveling the intricacies of her grandmother's estate. There were trusts in multiple countries, charitable foundations, luxury properties, and investment portfolios that spanned decades. She learned about the meticulous planning Eleanor had done, ensuring her wealth would not only endure, but create a lasting impact. Every document, every signature spoke of a woman who had lived carefully, thoughtfully, and with vision that Ava was only beginning to understand. It wasn't just the wealth itself that struck Ava, it was the responsibility. $5 billion wasn't simply money, it was power, influence, and expectation. She had to navigate taxes, management, and decisions that could affect thousands of lives. She realized that her grandmother had entrusted her with more than fortune. She had entrusted her with legacy. Amid the legal meetings and the overwhelming paperwork, Ava felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since Mark had left, she felt a flicker of control over her life. She could choose how to use this wealth. She could build something meaningful for her child. She could reclaim her agency in a world that had, until now, felt chaotic and cruel. But alongside empowerment came fear. Ava feared mistakes, exploitation, and the sudden exposure that such wealth inevitably brought. She feared losing herself in the pressures and the public scrutiny. Most of all, she feared repeating the mistakes of those who chose money over love, or who had been blind to the responsibilities it carried. During quiet moments, Ava allowed herself to imagine the possibilities. She pictured a foundation that could help single mothers and struggling families. She imagined safe spaces for children, hospitals, schools, programs that offered opportunities she once dreamed of but never had. She realized that the baby inside her would grow up in a world shaped not by Mark's choices and betrayal, but by her vision, her resilience, and her courage. And in the night, when the baby shifted inside her, Ava whispered not just promises of love and protection, but of strength. "We're going to be okay," she murmured. "I promise we'll be okay." The weight of the inheritance felt less like gold and more like a torch, one she was ready to carry forward, illuminating a path she had never imagined toward a future she was now determined to claim. Money can't erase heartbreak, but it can give you the power to rebuild. Ava sat at the long glass table in the corner office, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and listened carefully as the financial advisor outlined the first steps. Her notebook was open, pen poised, but the words seemed foreign at first. Trusts, portfolios, offshore holdings, investment vehicles. Terms she had never imagined learning about were suddenly central to her life. She had always associated wealth with privilege, not responsibility. Money to her had meant comfort, vacations, and small luxuries. Now, wealth had become something far more complex. It was a tool, a weapon, a responsibility. $5 billion wasn't just numbers in a bank, it was influence, control, and opportunity. And for the first time, Ava realized that understanding it would be her gateway to independence. The advisor, a calm woman named Clarissa, spoke in measured tones. "Ms. Whitman, the first step is understanding the trusts. Your grandmother structured her estate to remain largely anonymous. Most of the assets are in managed holdings. Your goal is not to spend recklessly, but to know where the power lies and how to preserve it." Ava nodded, trying to absorb every word. She was learning the rules of a world she had never entered, where decisions carried weight beyond personal consequence. Decisions could affect families, communities, and, in some cases, entire industries. For days, she studied. She read reports, articles, and books on wealth management, corporate law, philanthropy, and strategic investments. Each page opened a new door, revealing a landscape of opportunity and risk. She learned that wealth, in isolation, could be dangerous. Ignored, it could attract predators, invite jealousy, and erode personal integrity. But wielded wisely, it could build legacies, protect lives, and change communities. Ava's nights were long. The baby stirred frequently, a gentle reminder that she was not just learning for herself, but for another life entirely. She scribbled notes by the bedside lamp, sketching diagrams of trusts, mapping out potential philanthropic projects, and imagining safe spaces for the child she would raise. Sleep was secondary. Purpose was primary. There were moments of frustration, too. Legal documents felt like labyrinths, each clause twisting back on itself, requiring careful consideration. Ava wanted to rush, to feel mastery, but Clarissa reminded her that haste was dangerous. Power comes slowly, she said. Understanding it takes patience. Wealth is not just inherited, it must be learned. Ava began to make small, strategic decisions. She opened a private trust account in her own name, maintaining anonymity, and set aside funds specifically for her child's future. She learned about investment diversification, about balancing high-risk ventures with stable ones, and about creating financial buffers that would protect her family from unforeseen events. Every decision strengthened her confidence, a subtle shift from the despair she had felt months earlier. Even as she navigated the mechanics of money, her emotional landscape was evolving. The betrayal she had endured no longer defined her. She thought of Mark, sometimes with anger, sometimes with disbelief, but increasingly she felt a quiet detachment. Wealth was not revenge, it was autonomy, and autonomy, she realized, was far more valuable than fleeting satisfaction. Outside her office sessions, Ava began to explore other ways to learn. She attended workshops on philanthropy, leadership, and social impact. She joined small, invitation-only gatherings of women who managed large estates, observing, asking questions, and quietly absorbing the nuances of influence. Each conversation was a revelation. Power wasn't flaunted, it was exercised, subtly, strategically, and with foresight. At home, Helen watched the transformation with quiet pride. Ava moved through her days with a focus that was almost terrifying in its intensity. She made lists, prioritized tasks, and set timelines. Every decision carried weight, and she bore it with grace, even as her body reminded her of the pregnancy she still carried alone. The physical strain did not deter her. Instead, it seemed to sharpen her determination. One afternoon, Clarissa brought a binder with detailed charts of assets, projected returns, and risk analyses. Ava studied it carefully, noting each variable, each contingency plan. She imagined herself as a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of decisions, each movement precise, purposeful, and intentional. Yet, amidst the focus on strategy, Ava allowed herself moments of reflection. She walked along the neighborhood streets, feeling the cool breeze against her face, thinking about the life she had left behind and the life she was building. She considered the irony that wealth had arrived not as comfort, but as a challenge, an invitation to step fully into a world she had never known and to wield influence with integrity. In these quiet moments, she thought about her child. The baby's movements, gentle and persistent, reminded her why she could not fail. Every decision, every lesson learned, every late night of reading and note-taking was for this small life. She whispered promises not of wealth, but of security, education, and a world shaped by purpose. Ava also began to consider the ethical dimensions of her inheritance. The power she now wielded could change lives, but it could also destroy them if misused. She studied the examples of historical philanthropists, wealthy families, and social leaders who had failed, sometimes spectacularly, in wielding influence responsibly. She learned from their mistakes, internalizing lessons about humility, foresight, and moral responsibility. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Ava's posture, tone, and presence changed. She no longer felt like a woman defined by heartbreak or abandonment. She felt like a strategist, a protector, a decision maker. The baby growing inside her was not just a motivator, it was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that life continues even after betrayal and loss. But along with empowerment came pressure. Ava had to confront the reality that wealth could attract scrutiny, envy, and even danger. She practiced discretion, learned the importance of privacy, and cultivated a small, trustworthy circle of advisors and friends. Every interaction was measured, every step deliberate. The world of power was complex, and mistakes could be costly. Through months of study and application, Ava discovered another truth. Knowledge was as important as wealth. The ability to understand, anticipate, and act wisely was what transformed money into a tool for stability, independence, and legacy. She realized that the skills she was learning now, strategic thinking, negotiation, foresight, were shaping her into a mother who could not only survive, but thrive, regardless of the circumstances she had inherited from Mark or fate. Even in the quiet evenings, when fatigue pressed against her like a weight, she felt a subtle thrill. She was learning something few people ever did: how to wield power responsibly. She wasn't doing it for show, nor for revenge, nor to prove Mark wrong. She was doing it for herself, for her child, and for the life she was determined to reclaim. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world that once felt empty began to feel like a place of potential. The betrayal, the loss, the heartbreak, all were now catalysts, propelling her into a future she was shaping with intention, intelligence, and courage. Ava realized that power, in its truest form, was not about domination or wealth alone. It was about choice. It was about agency. It was about taking control of circumstances when life tried to rob you of them. And for the first time in months, she felt that power in her hands, solid, tangible, and undeniable. She was ready. He thought he had it all, but wealth doesn't guarantee love or peace. Mark sat in his penthouse apartment in downtown Seattle, the city lights sprawling beneath him like a glittering carpet of possibility. Claudia's laughter echoed from the other room, bright, practiced, and, to him, intoxicating. She moved with a confidence Mark had always admired, the kind of woman who commanded attention simply by entering a room. She was everything he had thought he wanted: wealthy, beautiful, and ambitious. For months, he had believed that by leaving Ava, he had claimed a victory. He had shed the responsibilities of impending fatherhood, the slow-moving tension of a relationship that required patience, compromise, and emotional labor. Claudia's world was fast-paced, sleek, and glamorous, everything Mark had imagined his life could be once he no longer carried someone else's needs, someone else's life, someone else's heartbreak. But as he watched Claudia organize a dinner party for her business associates, arranging bottles of wine and appetizers with meticulous precision, he felt the first stirrings of unease. The apartment, which had once felt exhilarating in its modernity, now seemed rigid, almost suffocating. Every detail, every choice had to reflect her taste, her approval, her image. Mark realized, with a sinking feeling, that he had traded one form of pressure for another. Dinner parties became a ritual he both anticipated and dreaded. Guests smiled, spoke politely, and complimented the art on the walls, the lighting, the carefully curated drinks. Claudia floated through the room, charming, commanding, flawless. And Mark? He felt increasingly invisible, an accessory rather than a partner, a shadow cast by her brilliance. He tried to remind himself of the benefits. Claudia was wealthy. She could give him experiences Ava never could. They traveled frequently, staying in luxury hotels, attending exclusive events, and mingling with people whose names he recognized from magazines. On paper, Mark's life looked enviable. But paper could not capture the subtle emptiness, the hollow sensation that gnawed at him during quiet moments, in the spaces between laughter and conversation. Mark began noticing patterns he had ignored before. Claudia's charm carried control. Small, almost imperceptible nudges that guided every choice, every movement, every conversation. She criticized casually, masked her disapproval with smiles, and expected gratitude for even the smallest contributions he made. He remembered the ease of life with Ava, the comfort of being accepted, of having someone who saw him, flaws and all. Claudia's perfection demanded constant performance, and the realization made him anxious. One evening, as they prepared for a gala, Mark found himself standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the reflection of the city below. Claudia was in the bedroom, choosing her gown, speaking to her stylist about accessories and hair. Mark's reflection looked stranger to him than the city lights. He felt disconnected, a participant in a life that no longer felt his own. His phone buzzed, a message from a colleague. "Congrats on the new project. Heard about the acquisition. Big move." Mark typed a polite response, but felt the absurdity of it. None of these professional victories, none of the social triumphs filled the void he hadn't realized existed. The emptiness lingered, like an echo of the love he had walked away from. Claudia emerged in a shimmering black dress, flawless, radiant, and demanding his admiration. "You look okay," she said, lightly brushing past him, her voice casual, almost dismissive. The words cut deeper than any insult could have. He forced a smile, nodded, and followed her lead, reminding himself that this was the life he had chosen. As the months passed, the tension grew. Claudia's expectations expanded. Every dinner, every social gathering, every weekend trip became a performance. Mark found himself exhausted, drained by the constant pressure to meet her standards, to embody the person she admired. And yet, he couldn't escape. He had built this life, and leaving it would feel like failure, a return to mediocrity, a public acknowledgement that he had made the wrong choice. Mark began comparing his life now with the one he had abandoned. He thought about Ava, about her pregnancy, about the small apartment they had shared, and the intimacy of a life built together. He realized that love, compromise, and patience had value he had overlooked. With Claudia, there was no compromise, only expectation, perfection, and performance. He had traded warmth for shine, connection for aesthetics, and in the quiet moments, he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The first real confrontation came during a weekend getaway. Claudia had booked a villa overlooking the ocean, the kind of place that made Instagram posts feel mundane. Mark felt restless as she meticulously planned every activity. "I thought we'd go snorkeling," he said, trying to sound casual. "We'll go after brunch," she replied sharply, not looking at him. "And make sure you're ready by 9. The boat leaves exactly on schedule. I don't want delays." Mark paused, the words sticking in his throat. In that moment, he realized he was no longer part of the decision-making process. He was a passenger, following a carefully orchestrated itinerary. The freedom he had imagined when leaving Ava was an illusion. He was confined, controlled, and yet too proud to admit it. That night, alone in the villa's bedroom, Mark lay awake, listening to the waves crashing against the shore. Claudia slept beside him, perfect and serene, unaware of the turmoil in his mind. He thought about Ava, about the life he had abandoned, about the promises he had broken. Regret began to stir, subtle at first, then more insistent, a low hum of realization that he had traded authenticity for glamour, love for appearances. He began noticing the small fractures in Claudia's charm, moments when her perfection faltered, when irritation bubbled under her composed exterior, when subtle cruelty surfaced in casual comments. The illusion of her happiness was no longer flawless. The veneer had cracks, and those cracks reflected the life he had lost with Ava. At work, Mark found himself distracted. Deals that once thrilled him now felt hollow. He realized that ambition, money, and status could not replace connection, trust, or intimacy. The life he had thought he wanted was a mirage. The reality was suffocating, demanding, and empty. Social events, which had once been exciting, became exercises in endurance. Mark observed the wealthy elite, noticing their calculated smiles, their subtle manipulations, and the constant evaluation of one another. He felt like a student in a class he didn't want to attend, a participant in a game that no longer brought joy. Late nights became common. Mark found himself wandering the city streets alone, walking past cafes and bookstores that reminded him of Ava, of quiet evenings spent dreaming, planning, and simply being. He imagined her strength, her resilience, and the life she was building for her child. A pang of envy struck him, not for the wealth she now possessed, but for the autonomy and purpose she had cultivated in the aftermath of his betrayal. Sometimes the past shows up when you least expect it. The rain had been relentless all evening, drumming against the asphalt and streaking down the glass windows of downtown Seattle. Mark had been running late for a gala, one of those exclusive, curated events where everyone knew someone and nobody left without carefully measured smiles and handshakes. He tucked his umbrella under his arm, shaking off the water, his tailored suit clinging slightly from the drizzle. As he entered the main hall, he noticed the usual throng of wealthy socialites, their laughter echoing against the polished marble. Waiters carried trays of champagne, servers flitted through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres, and everywhere he looked, someone was recording, photographing, or live streaming. He had learned to navigate these events with practiced ease, blending in while silently observing, a skill honed over months of high society maneuvering. And then he saw her. She wasn't in the room at first. She was outside, stepping between camera crews, adjusting her coat, rainwater glistening on her hair. Mark froze, the sound of the crowd dimming around him, replaced by the rapid thump of his own heartbeat. Ava. She was different. The woman standing there, composed and radiant, exuded confidence and purpose in a way he had never fully appreciated before. He couldn't look away. She was surrounded by a small group of journalists, lights bouncing off umbrellas and reflective surfaces. She answered questions with poise, her voice steady, articulate, compelling. Each word carried authority. Each gesture was deliberate. She moved as if she owned the space, commanding attention without demanding it. And Mark, who had once believed leaving her would free him, now felt a pang of something he hadn't expected: awe. Memories rushed back unbidden. The late nights in their small apartment when she had fallen asleep with her head on his shoulder. The time she had stayed up with him during his exams, encouraging him when he felt inadequate. The tiny victories they had celebrated together, the first apartment, the baby they had planned. Every memory hit him like a sudden gust of wind, knocking the breath out of him. And yet, the Ava before him was unmistakably transformed. The hardship, betrayal, and responsibility he had left behind had forged a woman of resilience and power. She was thriving, her energy palpable, her presence magnetic. Mark felt a twinge of regret he couldn't ignore. He stepped closer, trying to get a better look, but stayed behind the crowd, hiding, unwilling to make himself known. She was speaking to a reporter now, outlining a new initiative she had launched, a program for young mothers offering education, resources, and support. Mark watched, transfixed, as her passion poured into the words, her conviction evident. The contrast with his own life was stark. He had wealth, luxury, status, but it felt hollow now, like glitter on top of emptiness. Ava had created meaning out of hardship. She had taken the circumstances he thought would define her and turned them into purpose. And in that realization, Mark felt something he hadn't anticipated: the sharp edge of inadequacy, a gnawing awareness that she had surpassed him. The rain intensified, drumming on the umbrellas, the asphalt, the glass. Yet Ava moved with grace, unaffected by the elements. She answered questions, smiled politely, redirected attention with subtlety, and when she finally turned, brushing her hair from her face, her eyes met his, though of course she didn't recognize him. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Mark felt the weight of every choice he had made, every moment he had walked away from her replay in rapid succession. The pain he had caused, the life he had abandoned, and the small victories he had forfeited. All of it pressed down, and yet it was overshadowed by the brilliance of what she had become. He noticed the way she carried herself, her posture, the confidence in her stride, the careful modulation of her voice. He realized he had underestimated her entirely, had assumed that leaving her would diminish her, that betrayal would weaken her resolve. And here she was, radiant and unbroken, even in the face of the challenges life had thrown at her. Mark found a quiet corner, leaning against a wall, as if the shadows could shield him from recognition. He watched her interact with the crew, answer questions, and move between moments with precision. Every word she spoke radiated competence, empathy, and authority. He realized, with an uncomfortable clarity, that she no longer needed him. Not for validation, not for support, not for love. A memory surfaced unexpectedly, vivid and painful. He recalled the night he had left, the phone call, the words that had shattered her world. He remembered her voice, trembling but resolute, even as she cried. He had believed freedom awaited him on the other side of abandonment, but witnessing her now, he recognized the irony. She had found her own power, her own freedom, while he had built a life shackled by appearances and obligation. As the night progressed, Mark continued to observe from the sidelines. Ava moved effortlessly among the camera crew, journalists, and attendees, always in control of the narrative, always composed. There was no trace of the vulnerable woman he had once known, the one who had clung to him in fear and uncertainty. She had evolved beyond the limitations he had assumed she would bear. The encounter was brief, almost incidental, a fleeting moment, a fleeting intersection of their lives, but it left an indelible mark on Mark. He felt a mix of awe, regret, and a creeping sense of inadequacy. The illusion of his life with Claudia, the wealth and status he had pursued, seemed hollow against the tangible purpose and authenticity he saw in Ava. Later, as he walked through the rain-soaked streets alone, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, Mark replayed every detail of the encounter in his mind. The way she had smiled politely at a reporter, the subtle nod to an assistant, the confident walk of her walk, all of it highlighted the transformation he had ignored, the resilience he had underestimated. He realized something uncomfortable. He had been chasing wealth and status, while she had been building power, influence, and autonomy. And in that realization, he felt a pang of fear. Fear that she had moved beyond the possibility of his interference, beyond the reach of regret, and beyond the world he had tried to control. By the time Mark returned to Claudia's apartment, soaked and contemplative, he felt the weight of a truth he couldn't escape. Ava had changed, and so had the balance of their lives. He had sought to dominate his own narrative, to rewrite the rules of his future by abandoning her. but she had rewritten hers instead, without him, without apology, and without hesitation. He stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline, the rain falling steadily, and for the first time, he confronted the stark reality. The life he had imagined, the happiness he had believed in, was an illusion, and Ava, stronger, wiser, and thriving, was living a reality he could no longer touch. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to create a future that mattered. Ava stood in the sunlit atrium of her grandmother's old estate, the estate that had been hers now for several months, and breathed in the possibilities. The hall smelled faintly of old oak and polished floors, a comforting reminder of Eleanor Whitman's meticulous care and foresight. For Ava, it wasn't just the wealth that mattered, it was the chance to transform it into something meaningful, something that could impact lives far beyond her own. The foundation was her vision. She had spent countless nights drafting mission statements, identifying potential programs, and imagining spaces that could serve as havens for families struggling to find stability. She wanted it to be more than just a philanthropic organization. It had to embody the values her grandmother had quietly championed and the principles Ava now believed in herself: empowerment, education, and opportunity. She had already assembled a team of advisors, project managers, and legal consultants, each person hand-picked for integrity and expertise. The first meeting was held in the spacious conference room, sunlight streaming through tall windows, dust motes floating lazily in the light. Ava sat at the head of the table, feeling the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on her shoulders. "This foundation isn't about publicity," she began, her voice steady, resonant with conviction. "It's not about awards, recognition, or approval. It's about creating real change, giving families the tools they need to thrive, and ensuring that children and parents have opportunities that were denied to them in the past." Her team listened attentively, nodding, scribbling notes, and occasionally asking questions that challenged her assumptions. Ava welcomed it. It was crucial that the foundation was built on substance, not ego. Over the following weeks, she threw herself into planning. She visited local shelters, met with educators, and spoke with social workers to understand the real gaps in support for single parents and struggling families. She made notes about affordable childcare programs, financial literacy workshops, mentorship initiatives, and housing assistance. Every detail mattered, and Ava poured her energy into ensuring that the foundation would be comprehensive, sustainable, and impactful. Evenings were spent in quiet reflection, Ava seated by the fireplace in her grandmother's study, the baby stirring inside as she typed emails, reviewed reports, and sketched out ideas for new programs. She thought about the families she had met during her research, their struggles, their resilience, their dreams, and she realized something profound. Her wealth, which had once seemed abstract and distant, could now be transformed into tangible, life-altering support. The emotional impact of this work was immediate. Ava found herself feeling fulfilled in ways money alone had never offered. Every phone call with a community leader, every plan drafted for educational scholarships, every meeting to discuss safe housing for single mothers reinforced a growing sense of purpose. She was no longer defined by betrayal or abandonment. She was defined by action, vision, and the quiet, relentless pursuit of positive impact. But the journey wasn't without challenges. Early logistical hurdles tested her patience and resolve. One week, she discovered that a key property she intended to convert into a shelter had zoning restrictions she hadn't anticipated. Another week, a grant application for educational programs was delayed due to bureaucratic red tape. Each obstacle felt magnified, yet Ava approached them methodically, applying the strategic skills she had honed while learning to manage her grandmother's estate. Her team became her sounding board, offering perspectives that often illuminated blind spots she hadn't considered. "We need to ensure sustainability," one advisor noted. "Ava, your vision is incredible, but we must think long term. What happens 5, 10, 20 years from now?" Ava nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes. She realized that building a legacy required not only passion, but planning, foresight, and humility. She had to think beyond immediate impact and consider the generations that would benefit from the foundation's work. It was a lesson in patience and persistence, a skill she had never fully appreciated during her life with Mark. Meanwhile, Ava's personal growth continued alongside the foundation. She began hiring mentors to help her navigate leadership, ethics, and organizational strategy. Each session challenged her, encouraging her to reflect on her values, her vision, and the long-term societal impact of her work. The process was transformative. Ava was becoming not just a philanthropist, but a leader, a strategist, and a guide for others. There were also moments of doubt. Some nights she questioned whether the foundation could truly make a difference, whether her efforts would be enough. She remembered the despair she had felt when Mark left, the sleepless nights at her mother's apartment, the crushing loneliness. And she realized that the pain she had endured was now fueling her determination. Every obstacle became a test of resilience, every setback a lesson in perseverance. One day, while visiting a community center, Ava encountered a young mother named Lily. Lily was exhausted, juggling 2 jobs, childcare, and night classes. She had a quiet strength, but the weight of her circumstances was evident in the lines of worry etched into her face. Ava listened as Lily shared her struggles, her hopes, and her fears. By the end of the conversation, Ava promised to help through scholarships, childcare assistance, and mentorship. The gratitude in Lily's eyes was transformative for Ava. It reminded her that the foundation wasn't just numbers and programs, it was lives, stories, and futures. Mark, unaware of these developments, remained in his illusion of happiness, oblivious to the transformation Ava had undergone. He would have recognized her in passing, perhaps, but not the authority, resilience, and vision she now radiated. Ava moved through the world with a confidence that didn't rely on validation from anyone, especially not him. The foundation's launch event was a moment Ava had anticipated with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had spent months preparing, planning speeches, organizing programs, coordinating media coverage. The venue was filled with community leaders, educators, social workers, and families who had benefited from her early efforts. As she stepped to the podium, she felt a quiet pride, a sense of purpose that made every challenge of the past year feel worthwhile. "This foundation," she began, her voice clear and strong, "is not about me. It is about every parent, every child, every family who has faced obstacles and persevered despite them. It is about creating opportunities, providing resources, and building a community that supports one another. We have the power to change lives, and it starts here, today." The applause was genuine, heartfelt, and overwhelming. Ava scanned the room, seeing hope reflected in faces that mirrored the struggles she remembered from her research. And in that moment, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The wealth she had inherited was no longer simply a number on a balance sheet. It had become a tool for purpose, for empowerment, for lasting change. In the weeks that followed, Ava continued to expand the foundation's reach. She partnered with schools, local businesses, and government programs. She visited families, attending small events, mentoring parents, and witnessing the tangible effects of her efforts. Every success, no matter how small, reinforced her commitment and strengthened her resolve. Her relationship with wealth had transformed. It was no longer a symbol of status or revenge. It was a mechanism for impact, a conduit through which she could exercise autonomy and integrity. She had learned to navigate complex financial structures, to manage resources responsibly, and to balance ambition with ethics. And in doing so, she had built something enduring, a legacy that extended beyond herself, beyond her child, and beyond the pain of the past. Even in moments of quiet reflection, Ava felt a sense of empowerment she had never known. She would sit in her grandmother's garden, watching the sun set over the horizon, and feel the life she was shaping with intention. The baby inside her stirred, reminding her that the future she was building was not abstract, it was alive, tangible, and profoundly meaningful. Ava had no desire for revenge, no interest in proving Mark wrong. His choices no longer held power over her. Instead, she had reclaimed her narrative, her agency, and her purpose. And in doing so, she had created something far more valuable than wealth or status, a future that mattered. The moment that changed everything forever. The early morning was quiet, the world still cloaked in the soft gray haze of dawn. Ava felt it first as a subtle tightening in her abdomen, a rhythm that whispered urgency. She had anticipated this moment with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, but now, as the contractions intensified, anticipation gave way to raw, unfiltered reality. Her mother, Helen, was by her side, calm and reassuring, a steady presence against the storm of emotion and physical pain. "You've got this, Ava," she said gently, holding her daughter's hand, her eyes bright with pride and love. "You've prepared for this your whole life, in ways you may not even realize. Now it's time to bring her into the world." Ava breathed deeply, focusing on the rhythm of her body, each contraction a wave she had no choice but to ride. The months of planning, struggle, and growth culminated in this moment. Every challenge, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, the foundation, the learning, the building of her new life had led to this. She wasn't just giving birth to a child, she was witnessing the culmination of resilience and strength forged through adversity. The ride to the hospital was tense, but filled with quiet determination. Helen offered words of comfort, occasional jokes to lighten the tension, and moments of silence when Ava needed to focus inward. The city passed by in muted colors, rain glistening on windows, echoing the tumultuous journey that had brought her here. In the delivery room, Ava felt an odd mixture of vulnerability and empowerment. Nurses moved efficiently, guiding her through each stage with professional precision. Her own heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the medical monitors, a steady drumbeat amidst the ebb and flow of contraction and rest. The hours stretched, slow and deliberate, each one marked by effort, sweat, and perseverance. Ava's mind wandered, reflecting on the life she had created for herself, the foundation she had launched, the woman she had become. She thought of Leela, the name she had chosen weeks ago, a name that symbolized hope, resilience, and the bright promise of the future. Each thought fueled her determination, reminding her why this effort, this struggle, was worth it. Finally, in the quiet intensity of early morning, with a chorus of supportive voices guiding her, Ava heard it, the first cry. The sound was immediate, visceral, overwhelming. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out, her hands trembling, her heart swelling with a love she had never imagined. Leela was here, small and perfect, eyes fluttering open, searching, discovering. Ava held her close, feeling warmth, weight, and a profound connection that transcended words. In that instant, the months of hardship seemed to lift. The betrayal, the loneliness, the struggle to reclaim her life, all of it faded into the background. Leela's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, grounding Ava in a love so pure, so transformative, that it eclipsed all else. The nurses cooed, offering congratulations, checking vitals, and guiding Ava through the immediate post-birth steps. Helen sat nearby, silently weeping with pride, while Ava whispered to Leela, promising safety, guidance, and love. "We made it," she said softly, "and together we'll make everything better." As the days passed, Ava settled into the rhythms of motherhood, navigating feedings, sleepless nights, and the overwhelming joy that accompanied every small milestone. Each smile, coo, and grasp of her tiny hand reinforced the sense of purpose she had cultivated over the past year. She was no longer defined by the past. She was defined by the life she was actively shaping for herself, for Leela, and for the families the foundation supported. The foundation's first grants coincided with Ava's maternity leave, creating a unique convergence of personal and professional fulfillment. She watched as the family she had met months earlier began receiving scholarships, childcare assistance, and mentorship opportunities. Emails and photos arrived from grateful recipients, showing children attending school, parents gaining employment, and communities benefiting from small but meaningful improvements in their daily lives. Each story mirrored the joy she felt holding Leela, creating a tapestry of hope and impact. Ava recognized the extraordinary symmetry of her life. The child she nurtured symbolized new beginnings, while the foundation's work embodied the tangible change she could effect on the world. She felt a profound sense of completeness, a realization that strength, resilience, and purpose could coalesce into a life of meaning and fulfillment. Yet, even amidst this triumph, Ava remained grounded. She knew that the journey of raising Leela, building the foundation, and maintaining her autonomy would be ongoing. Challenges would arise, resources would need careful management, and unforeseen obstacles could emerge. But the pain of the past, the betrayal, and the struggles had taught her one essential truth: she could endure, adapt, and overcome. Helen often watched Ava in these moments, noting the quiet transformation. The woman who had arrived at her mother's home months ago, shattered and betrayed, had grown into a mother, a leader, and a force of change. The labor of life and the labor of birth had converged, and the result was a remarkable equilibrium of power, love, and purpose. Mark, oblivious to the depth of Ava's transformation, remained locked in his own illusion of success. He could not see the profound changes that had taken place, the strength that had emerged from heartbreak, or the life she now led with intention and grace. The contrast between their lives became increasingly stark, a silent testament to resilience and growth that he could no longer influence or control. In the weeks that followed, Ava balanced the demands of a newborn with the responsibilities of her foundation. Each day was a careful choreography of feedings, meetings, planning sessions, and quiet reflection. She celebrated small victories with Leela in her arms: a successful grant application, a smiling parent, a child attending school for the first time. These moments reinforced the sense that purpose and love could coexist, that wealth, when wielded responsibly, could become a tool for empowerment rather than vanity. Evenings were often quiet, with Ava and Helen sharing stories about Leela's day, reflecting on the Foundation's progress and contemplating the future. Ava's journal, once filled with notes about legal documents and financial planning, now included sketches of programs, reflections on motherhood, and letters to Leela, recording thoughts, hopes, and dreams she wanted her daughter to inherit, not in wealth, but in wisdom, resilience, and moral grounding. Ava's nights were long, but filled with wonder. She marveled at the tiny life she had created, feeling each movement, each sigh as a reminder of her journey. Leela became both anchor and inspiration, symbolizing not only the culmination of personal struggle, but also the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Through this chapter of birth and new beginnings, Ava recognized that power, love, and purpose were intertwined. Her wealth, her agency, and her leadership now had a tangible focus, embodied in her daughter and in the lives she touched through her foundation. She had created something enduring, a legacy that extended beyond personal satisfaction, beyond revenge, and beyond the fleeting illusions of status. He finally understood what he had lost, but it was too late. Mark sat alone in his penthouse. The city sprawled beneath him like a network of tiny lights, each one a reminder of the life he had built, or so he thought. Claudia's presence, once dazzling, now felt like a shadow pressing in from all sides. The apartment, once a symbol of victory, felt sterile and cold. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the glass walls as rain streaked down like a curtain between him and the world. The first cracks in his illusion had appeared months ago. The controlled perfection of his life with Claudia, the relentless expectations, the lack of genuine connection, they had begun to gnaw at him. But now, those cracks widened into a chasm of clarity, and with it came something far more unsettling. He could see Ava. He had seen her in passing, at events, through social media glimpses, and occasionally through news articles highlighting her philanthropic work. Each image, each headline, was a reminder of the life he had abandoned. She was thriving, radiant, and respected. She had grown into something he could never influence, something he could never reclaim. And yet, the deeper pain was not simply her success, it was the realization that she no longer needed him. Mark recalled the night he had left her. The phone call still haunted him. The tears, the trembling voice, the pleading he had dismissed as weakness. At the time, he had believed he was making the rational choice, trading responsibility and discomfort for freedom and excitement. But now, in the hollow silence of his penthouse, he understood the magnitude of his error. He had left love behind, thinking wealth and status could compensate. But wealth was tangible. Love, trust, and respect were irreplaceable. The life he had constructed, filled with luxury and appearances, had no soul, no warmth, and no real connection. It was a gilded cage, one he could not escape, no matter how hard he tried. Mark began to reflect on Ava's transformation. He remembered her when she had been 6 months pregnant, alone, vulnerable, yet remarkably composed. He remembered the strength that had carried her through betrayal, the resilience that had allowed her to build a foundation, raise her child, and thrive without him. Every memory underscored his inadequacy, his short-sightedness, and his failure to recognize her value when it had mattered most. The contrast between their lives was stark. Ava's world was one of purpose, connection, and impact. His was one of appearances, obligations, and fleeting satisfaction. He had chosen the wrong currency, status instead of substance, glamour instead of depth, and control instead of partnership. And now, as he watched her success from a distance, the emptiness of his choices became undeniable. In moments of quiet reflection, Mark revisited the decisions that had brought him here. Each choice, once rationalized as ambition or desire, now appeared short-sighted, selfish, and naive. Leaving Ava had been an act of immediate gratification, a pursuit of novelty over commitment. But the consequences were lasting, echoing through his life like the cold reverberations of a bell in an empty hall. He remembered the small moments he had taken for granted, the quiet evenings, the laughter, the shared dreams. Those moments had been priceless, yet he had dismissed them, trading authenticity for illusion. Now, surrounded by wealth, he realized that wealth alone could never provide the fulfillment those moments had offered. The lesson was painful, a slow, gnawing ache that refused to dissipate. Mark's social life had changed little in terms of activity. He attended galas, business meetings, and exclusive parties. On the surface, his life appeared enviable, glamorous, and exciting. But the vibrancy was superficial, a carefully constructed veneer that masked profound dissatisfaction. Conversations felt hollow, relationships transactional, and experiences ephemeral. He could buy attention, but not respect. He could purchase presence, but not connection. One evening, at a charity gala he attended reluctantly with Claudia, he saw Ava's foundation in the headlines. A photograph of her, holding Lila and speaking to a crowd of families, caught his attention. The energy in the image radiated authenticity, purpose, and joy, the very qualities he had once believed he could secure through wealth and status alone. He felt a pang in his chest, a mixture of admiration, regret, and profound loss. He remembered the promises he had broken, the future he had abandoned, the child he had never met, the partnership he had dismissed, the trust he had violated. It all came rushing back in waves, and with it, a bitter truth. He could not reclaim what he had destroyed. The cost of selfishness and short-sightedness was exact, unforgiving, and irreversible. Mark's attempts to assert control in his life felt absurd. Wealth could no longer provide validation, intimacy, or influence over the one life that mattered, Ava's. He had learned, painfully, that the most valuable currencies were not dollars or social prestige, but loyalty, trust, and emotional connection. And these were not commodities to be acquired. They were cultivated, cherished, and preserved. He began to reflect on the moments that seemed inconsequential at the time, the laughter they had shared, the plans for their future, the conversations about children, dreams, and values. He had dismissed them as routine, mundane, or inconvenient. Now they appeared luminous, irreplaceable, and tragically lost. Mark found himself walking the city streets late at night, the lights reflecting on wet asphalt, the air damp with rain. He replayed every memory with Ava in his mind, analyzing, rationalizing, and ultimately confronting the truth. He had forfeited genuine happiness for a mirage. The wealth, status, and control he had sought were insufficient, hollow, and unfulfilling. Even his relationship with Claudia began to reveal cracks. The control, expectations, and subtle manipulations he had once admired now felt oppressive. The luxury, glamour, and privilege could not substitute for authentic companionship, respect, or emotional connection. He realized with growing disquiet that the life he had chosen, the life he had believed would bring freedom, had become a gilded cage of his own making. Mark's reflections extended beyond personal loss. He considered the broader implications of his choices, the people he had hurt, the relationships he had abandoned, and the lessons he had ignored. The path he had taken was one of immediate gratification, but its consequences were far-reaching, rippling outward in ways he could not control or undo. He thought about Ava and Lila, about the foundation and its impact, and the contrast with his own emptiness. Each philanthropic success she achieved was a reminder of the agency, foresight, and resilience he had ignored or dismissed. He realized bitterly that true influence and respect could not be purchased. They had to be earned, nurtured, and exercised with integrity. The lesson was harsh, almost unbearable in its clarity. Wealth alone could not redeem his failures, nor restore the trust he had broken. Love, respect, and connection could not be substituted with money, status, or appearances. The life he had imagined, the happiness he had pursued, was an illusion, a mirage that now left him painfully aware of its inadequacy. Mark's nights became longer, quieter, filled with reflection, regret, and an awareness of the irreversible consequences of his choices. He observed Ava's successes, Lila's growth, and the Foundation's impact from afar, and each observation deepened his understanding of the hard lesson he was living. Some losses, once realized, could never be reclaimed. The realization was compounded by moments of intended clarity, conversations with friends, glimpses of his past through photographs, and the stark contrast between Ava's thriving life and his hollow existence. Every day, he confronted the truth that selfishness and short-sightedness bore a cost, and that cost was permanent, unyielding, and deeply personal. Some victories are worth more than billions. Ava walked along the shoreline, the early morning sun stretching across the horizon, casting gold and rose across the rippling water. Leela, nestled snugly in her carrier, cooed softly against her chest, her tiny hands exploring the world with curiosity and trust. The sound of waves brushing against the sand, the rhythmic cries of gulls overhead, and the subtle scent of salt in the air created a sense of timelessness that filled Ava with peace she hadn't known she could feel. Each step she took was deliberate, grounding her in the moment. The beach was quiet, almost empty at this hour, save for the occasional jogger or dog walker. The wind tugged gently at her hair, and she breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past years lift incrementally with every inhale. Betrayal, heartbreak, exhaustion, and doubt, they all had shaped her, but now they were fragments, faint echoes in the light of a life she had reclaimed. She glanced down at Leela, whose eyes were wide, bright, and curious. Even in the soft morning light, Ava could see the spark of intelligence, resilience, and wonder in her daughter. Leela was a living reminder of everything she had fought for, endured, and built. Holding her close, Ava felt an unshakable bond, one that had been forged in the crucible of adversity and strengthened by love, purpose, and determination. The journey to this moment had been anything but linear. Ava remembered the nights of despair when she would sit in her mother's living room, cradling her growing belly, questioning how she would survive. She had felt alone in a world that seemed determined to remind her of betrayal. And yet, those same nights had also been moments of quiet resolve. She had promised herself and her unborn child that they would rise, that they would thrive, and that they would create a life defined not by loss, but by courage, resilience, and self-determination. The foundation had grown in tandem with her personal journey, each grant awarded, each family assisted, each life touched was a tangible manifestation of the strength she had cultivated. Seeing Leela interact with the children and families at community events, their faces lighting up with hope and gratitude, reinforced the realization that her life was about more than wealth. It was about impact, about leaving a legacy that transcended numbers and bank accounts. Ava remembered the first board meeting she had chaired months earlier, when she had been nervous, unsure if she could command authority while carrying the weight of her new responsibilities. Now she led with confidence, grace, and clarity, making decisions that affected countless lives with integrity and purpose. The irony was not lost on her. In building something larger than herself, she had discovered her own inner strength. The beach became a metaphor for her journey. The waves, relentless yet gentle, mirrored the passage of time and the ebb and flow of life's challenges. Each ripple reminded her that strength was not about control, but about endurance, adaptation, and flow. She thought about Mark, about the choices he had made, and about the lessons his absence had taught her. Love, trust, and respect could not be forced, bought, or manipulated. They had to be cultivated. And in cultivating her own life, she had discovered a richness no sum of money could ever provide. Ava paused, letting Leela rest against her chest, and gazed out at the horizon. The rising sun painted streaks of light across the water, each beam catching the subtle movements of the waves. She thought about her grandmother, about Eleanor Whitman's legacy, and about the opportunity she had been entrusted with, not merely to inherit wealth, but to shape it into purpose. It was a responsibility she embraced with humility, wisdom, and gratitude. Walking further along the sand, Ava reflected on the milestones she had achieved: the launch of the foundation, the first successful grants, the positive changes in the community, and the personal victories of motherhood. Each was a testament to resilience, the ability to rise after being knocked down, to transform pain into action, and to craft a life of meaning from circumstances that once seemed insurmountable. Her thoughts wandered to the concept of true wealth. She had once believed that financial abundance was the key to freedom and happiness, but now she understood that wealth in itself was hollow without purpose, without connection, and without impact. The real treasures were courage, perseverance, love, and the ability to shape one's destiny through deliberate action. These are the riches that Mark had failed to understand, the riches she now carried in abundance. Ava paused, letting Leela rest against her chest, and gazed out at the horizon. The rising sun painted streaks of light across the water, each beam catching the subtle movements of the waves. She thought about her grandmother, about Eleanor Whitman's legacy, and about the opportunity she had been entrusted with, not merely to inherit wealth, but to shape it into purpose. It was a responsibility she embraced with humility, wisdom, and gratitude. Walking further along the sand, Ava reflected on the milestones she had achieved: the launch of the foundation, the first successful grants, the positive changes in the community, and the personal victories of motherhood. Each was a testament to resilience, the ability to rise after being knocked down, to transform pain into action, and to craft a life of meaning from circumstances that once seemed insurmountable. Her thoughts wandered to the concept of true wealth. She had once believed that financial abundance was the key to freedom and happiness, but now she understood that wealth in itself was hollow without purpose, without connection, and without impact. The real treasures were courage, perseverance, love, and the ability to shape one's destiny through deliberate action. These are the riches that Mark had failed to understand, the riches she now carried in abundance. Ava paused, letting Leela rest against her chest, and gazed out at the horizon. The rising sun painted streaks of light across the water, each beam catching the subtle movements of the waves. She thought about her grandmother, about Eleanor Whitman's legacy, and about the opportunity she had been entrusted with, not merely to inherit wealth, but to shape it into purpose. It was a responsibility she embraced with humility, wisdom, and gratitude. Walking further along the sand, Ava reflected on the milestones she had achieved: the launch of the foundation, the first successful grants, the positive changes in the community, and the personal victories of motherhood. Each was a testament to resilience, the ability to rise after being knocked down, to transform pain into action, and to craft a life of meaning from circumstances that once seemed insurmountable. Her thoughts wandered to the concept of true wealth. She had once believed that financial abundance was the key to freedom and happiness, but now she understood that wealth in itself was hollow without purpose, without connection, and without impact. The real treasures were courage, perseverance, love, and the ability to shape one's destiny through deliberate action. These are the riches that Mark had failed to understand, the riches she now carried in abundance. Ava paused, letting Leela rest against her chest, and gazed out at the horizon. The rising sun painted streaks of light across the water, each beam catching the subtle movements of the waves. She thought about her grandmother, about Eleanor Whitman's legacy, and about the opportunity she had been entrusted with, not merely to inherit wealth, but to shape it into purpose. It was a responsibility she embraced with humility, wisdom, and gratitude. Walking further along the sand, Ava reflected on the milestones she had achieved: the launch of the foundation, the first successful grants, the positive changes in the community, and the personal victories of motherhood. Each was a testament to resilience, the ability to rise after being knocked down, to transform pain into action, and to craft a life of meaning from circumstances that once seemed insurmountable. Her thoughts wandered to the concept of true wealth. She had once believed that financial abundance was the key to freedom and happiness, but now she understood that wealth in itself was hollow without purpose, without connection, and without impact. The real treasures were courage, perseverance, love, and the ability to shape one's destiny through deliberate action. These are the riches that Mark had failed to understand, the riches she now carried in abundance. Ava paused, letting Leela rest against her chest, and gazed out at the horizon. The rising sun painted streaks of light across the water, each beam catching the subtle movements of the waves. She thought about her grandmother, about Eleanor Whitman's legacy, and about the opportunity she had been entrusted with, not merely to inherit wealth, but to shape it into purpose. It was a responsibility she embraced with humility, wisdom, and gratitude. Walking further along the sand, Ava reflected on the milestones she had achieved: the launch of the foundation, the first successful grants, the positive changes in the community, and the personal victories of motherhood. Each was a testament to resilience, the ability to rise after being knocked down, to transform pain into action, and to craft a life of meaning from circumstances that once seemed insurmountable. Her thoughts wandered to the concept of true wealth. She had once believed that financial abundance was the key to freedom and happiness, but now she understood that wealth in itself was hollow without purpose, without connection,